Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 273. Bully Hayes, Part 1. Warning: this episode does contain themes related to human trafficking, murder and child sexual assault, and uses terms that are not considered acceptable today. With my research on this episode, it's almost impossible to separate fact from legend regarding this man, and I've endeavoured to only present what is likely to be accurate accounts. They've either come from various sources or they've come from criminal investigations. William Henry Hayes, commonly known as Bully Hayes, was believed to have been born in 1827 in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, in the US. His father, Henry Hayes, is said to have kept either a tavern or an ordinary grog shop, and his mother's name is unknown. William Hayes received his education at Norfolk, Virginia, and later was appointed to a cadetship in the US Revenue Cutter Service, where he served with honour and promotion. He then resigned from the cutter service and became captain of one of the Great Lakes steamers on Lake Erie. On the 19th of December 1846, William Hayes married Lucy Ann Lysett in the state of Ohio. In 1852, he mistook a few horses belonging to a neighbour for his own, and he sold them accordingly and pocketed the cash. He only escaped prison time by a flaw in the indictment, and he fled to California with another wife. This was denied by Hayes in a letter to the Sydney Morning Herald on the 12th of January 1860 in answer to an article titled "The Story of a Scoundrel" that featured in the Herald on the 6th of January 1860. In this article, Hayes did not say who his father was or give any account of himself except to say that he was in Calcutta in 1852. The first authentic trace of William Hayes was on the 4th of March 1853 when the American bark Canton cleared from New York for Australia with a crew of 9 men and a cargo. The Canton was damaged by a gale after leaving New York and put into Rio de Janeiro, where her cargo was discharged and reshipped after she had been repaired. The ship sailed from Rio on the 25th of June 1853 and arrived in Melbourne on the 25th of August with 85 passengers. On the 6th of October 1853, the Canton cleared from Melbourne for Hobart Town, where 2 voyages were made to Geelong with timber, and on the 4th of May 1854 it cleared from Geelong in ballast for Sydney and arrived there on the 10th of May. In the Sydney Morning Herald on the 18th of May 1854, the Canton is advertised for sale, but there seems to have been no sale, as on the 27th of May she cleared for Guam in ballast. On the 11th of July 1854, the Canton arrived in Singapore, and the records of the Australian consul in Singapore show that on the 19th of July 1854, W.H. Hayes sold the boat and transferred it to John Harvey, who put her under a British flag and renamed her the Sanchubong. It seems that either in 1854 or 1855 he joined the US Navy. He was reported to have served with credit under Admiral Farragut. He fell in love with one of the officer's girlfriends, the officer being Captain Carroll. This resulted in a feud so bitter that Carroll never forgot, and years afterwards, during the Civil War, he brought the Confederate cruiser Shenandoah into the Pacific and sought to locate Hayes, who was operating there, to endeavour to settle old scores. Hayes resigned from the US Navy and got a job with the Chinese Navy. He said he was a US Navy captain on a China station and was court-martialed after hanging 25 Chinese pirates without a trial. But he would have only been 18 or 19 years old at the time, which makes it quite unlikely that he was in charge of a US gunboat. It didn't take long before he turned into criminal enterprises with the aid of another American captain, Ben Pease. Bully and Pease sailed all around China, extorting merchants for their protection from pirates. They basically had a protection racket. They were mobsters. After their scam was exposed, Bully and Pease were fired from the Chinese Navy, and cheating merchant became Bully's full-time career. He was infamous for paying for the foretopsail, loaded up with cargo, and then sailing off in the middle of the night without paying. He also made money through insurance frauds and by stealing and selling ships through various cons. Notably, he never stole a ship or cargo on the high seas, so while he was frequently described as a pirate, he never actually committed piracy. He then went back to the US and took up with New York's gentry, from whom he learnt about property rights. He then departed New York, boarding a sailing vessel bound for San Francisco. He had a wife with him on the trip. Aboard this same boat was a rich merchant who fell under the spell of the charming young Hayes and spent long hours listening to fictitious accounts of shipping. By the time San Francisco was reached, this gentleman was ready not only to make a substantial investment in China trade, but he also set up Hayes's wife in the liquor business against his return from his first cruise, for Hayes was to command the ship fitted out by this gentleman, and they were to divide the profits at the end of each cruise. The brig Ontrato was purchased and fitted out most extravagantly under Hayes's direction, as to inaugurate so momentous an undertaking of this trans-Pacific trade route in an ordinary vessel would be most inauspicious. Everything was of the best and money was not spared. Provisions fit for a king's table were provided, with liquors and spices as well. With final instructions to his wife and a farewell shake of his partner's hand, the captain repaired on board to complete the arrangement of the cargo so that the customs could be passed. It was agreed that the partner would come on board in the morning and accompany them out of the harbour. That night the Ontrato hove up her anchor and with a fair breeze slipped quietly away through the Golden Gate. Her owner never again laid eyes upon this craft. The Ontrato sailed straight to China, where she disposed of her cargo to good advantage. The life of a tramp trader suited the captain to a turn, and he showed great ability in trading, his genial personality standing him in good stead. For months he plied between the ports along the coast with cargoes of coolies or produce. He sailed boldly into the Shanghai harbour and ordered from a somewhat obscure dealer an outfit of clothes costing about £500 for himself and about £40 each for the members of his crew. The tradesmen were overjoyed with the unexpected windfall and worked assiduously to complete the order on time. As was customary, the clothes were delivered beforehand, and on sailing day the tailor came to collect his pay. He was shown to a seat by the charming captain, who requested that he wait until the boat was gotten under way, when he would have the leisure to go below and get the money. The boat was under sail and passing out of the harbour, and the tradesmen in desperation asked for the money. "Oh, the money, yes, to be sure, the money, of course," smiled Hayes. "But you must see that it's inconvenient that I should pay you now. I'll return later and attend to that small matter. At the present moment I'm going to sea. You may either go back in your boat or go with me." Amid the sly smiles of the crew, the unfortunate man scrambled over the side. Hayes arrived in Singapore on the 21st of December 1855 on the Ontrato, with William as the master, from Swatow in China. The Ontrato was seized for debt and sold by the Vice Admiralty Court, and Hayes was stranded. But he was a charming young man with a good appearance and manners. He had a good voice, he sang nicely, and was generally liked, especially by women, and for over a year was lying at anchor in Singapore. He raised money at a number of places on bottomry bonds. A bottomry bond is an archaic maritime contract where a ship's master pledges the vessel, known as the bottom, as security for a loan to fund the essential repairs or the voyage expenses. The lender only receives repayment plus high interest if the ship survives the voyage, making it a high-risk loan for the creditor. On March the 10th, 1856, he was placed in charge of the Sanchubong, previously known as the Canton, and put her again under the American flag, and then it was named C.W. Bradley Jr., in compliment to Dr. Bradley, the American consul in Singapore. On the 1st of April 1856, Hayes mortgaged the C.W. Bradley to Deere and Webster, ship chandlers of Singapore, for $3,000. The next day, the C.W. Bradley, with Hayes the master, sailed from Singapore for Shanghai, and on the 18th of November 1856, the boat returned to Singapore, and William Hayes's career as thief developed. Hayes and the C.W. Bradley stayed in Singapore for only 2 days, during which time Hayes bought, on credit, as much valuable and easily portable property as he could, and had it sent on board the ship, promising payment the next day. The C.W. Bradley suddenly sailed from Singapore without clearing at customs for an unknown port, and neither Hayes nor the C.W. Bradley was ever seen again in Singapore. He turned up with the ship in Batavia,
where Hayes bought a quantity of valuable goods from Dutch merchants, paying the goods by drafts upon Darren Webster of Singapore, which drafts he had no authority to draw and of course were not paid. He then sailed from Batavia, touched in at Anya, and on the 30th of January 1857 arrived at the port of Fremantle in Western Australia. For 6 weeks, Hayes was in Fremantle enjoying himself. He was carrying, in inverted commas, a nurse with him on the voyage. Captain Edward Willett and a Mr. B.F. Baker were on board the C.W. Bradley with Hayes from Singapore to Australia. One or both coached Hayes. Baker appeared again in Sydney in January 1860 in connection with Hayes. Hayes was always well and neatly dressed, and he kept his ship in good order. He made an impression in Perth and Fremantle and was amongst society. He was very popular amongst the ladies and officials. He entertained the Chief Justice and the elite of the place on board his bark and gave many valuable presents to lady friends. He became engaged to Miss Scott, the daughter of the harbour master, and had taken her brother with him from Western Australia to Adelaide. Miss Scott's keepsake necklace from Hayes was passed through family generations and gifted to the Western Australian Museum in 1990. At the time that Hayes arrived at Western Australia, the state was in a depressed condition. The population was leaving rapidly. The C.W. Bradley was advertised to sail for Adelaide with passengers, and on the 11th of March 1857 she sailed with 6 cabin and 88 steerage passengers. Mr. D. and Mr. F. Scott, relatives of Hayes's prospective bride, were among the cabin passengers. Hayes arrived in Adelaide on the 24th of March 1857, and also at the port was a Portuguese ship named the Estrela del Norte. This vessel had brought a cargo of Chinese coolies from Macau and was commanded by Manuel Galati, and it was in financial difficulties. Hayes and Galati agreed to work a swindle, but the ultimate result was that Hayes lost money. Galati signed a bottomry bond over the Estrela del Norte in favour of Hayes for £3,000, and the ship was sent to Fremantle, sailing from Port Adelaide on the 4th of May 1857. She arrived in Fremantle but was stranded there, then was refloated and proceeded to the Vassie, where she loaded a cargo of jarrah, which Hayes had bought on credit from Mr. Yelverton. He sailed again for Fremantle on the 9th of April. He was not so well received on his return to Fremantle, for in the meantime the schooner Swallowed had arrived from Singapore, and her master, Captain Allen, had given the West Australians a true account of Hayes and his doings in Singapore. However, Hayes's plausibility was so great he was able to fool several Perth businessmen. He sailed from Fremantle again to Adelaide on the 24th of June 1857 with 99 passengers. The ship's cabin accommodation was reported to be excellent, and Bully readily found paying passengers for 2 trips to Adelaide. As many of these passengers were convicts with conditional pardons, the South Australian authorities were displeased with this influx of immigrants. He arrived in Adelaide on the 3rd of July 1857. The Adelaide papers 3 days later said that on Saturday night, the 4th of July, Captain Hayes entertained a number of gentlemen on board the C.W. Bradley in honour of the American Independence Day. Meanwhile, Dare and Webster of Singapore had sent to Adelaide their mortgage and authority to collect the boat as Hayes hadn't paid his bills. The C.W. Bradley and every tangible asset of the captain's was seized, and it was advertised by sale for auction. Hayes was put out of her, and on the 21st of July, it was sold for £1,250. The Estrela del Norte did not arrive in Port Adelaide from the Vassie with a cargo of jarrah until the 24th of October 1857, and then she was too deep to enter the river until some of the cargo was discharged, effectively losing money. After being turned out of the C.W. Bradley, Hayes lived ashore in Adelaide and Port Adelaide. And it was reported that Rosetta Collis married William Henry Hayes on the 1st of August 1857 in Adelaide, South Australia, although no formal marriage certificate could be found. William was 8 years older than Rosetta. Rosetta was English and had come out to Australia sometime between May 1856 and August 1857. She had a daughter, Hannah Rosetta Collis Hayes, born on the 18th of May 1858 in Adelaide. In the meantime, he'd made an acquaintance of a widow and a lady of means called Mrs. Amelia Littleton nee Moffat. He married her in the Clare Valley town of Penwortham on the 20th of August 1857 at St Mark's, ignoring the fact that he was already married. Perhaps he felt that with the money Amelia had, it could get him out of trouble. Amelia was 2 years older than William. She'd been born in England and previously married to William Weston Littleton at Port Adelaide on the 5th of July 1854 when she was 27. William Littleton died on the 19th of April 1856. She was 30 when she married William. Lucy Webb wrote in 1952, Bully Hayes the Buccaneer was married to widow Amelia Littleton of Port Adelaide at Penwortham, and Bully gave the clergyman Reverend William Wood a £10 wedding fee. And then on the 30th of May 1928 there was a reference to Bully Hayes's marriage. This was from A.T. Saunders, and it said, Sir, the Reverend William Wood of the Anglican Church in Penwortham, mentioned in the history of the Capunda Christ Church in Monday's Registrar, married in the Penwortham Church, William Henry Hayes, Bully Hayes, to Amelia Littleton, as Captain Allen and my aunt had met Hayes in Singapore in 1856 and 1857, and in Port Adelaide in 1858, and Mr. Wood said that Hayes had given Mrs. Wood a roll of grass cloth after paying Mr. Woods's fees. Mr. C.H.T. Connor is the sole Adelaide survivor who knew Bully Hayes and widow Littleton. The house in which Mr. and Mrs. Littleton lived is on the corner of St. Vincent and Mundy Street in Port Adelaide and is well preserved. In the Register of May 21st, 1857, is the report of Amelia Littleton versus Kerr for the cost of a pane of plate glass, in which it is mentioned that Captain Hayes paid for the glass originally. He became insolvent here and fled to Melbourne, and his wife followed. He got charge of an English ship and sailed from Melbourne with his wife on board, but the ship was taken out of his hands, and he and his wife went to San Francisco, and the wife disappeared. Some years later, Hayes turned up in New Zealand, married there, and his wife had twin daughters. So in Adelaide, Hayes took charge of the Estrella del Norte, displacing both Parkinson, Hayes's mate from the C.W. Bradley, and her original master, Golati, but they stayed on board, and also did the new Mrs. Hayes. On February the 9th, 1858, William Henry Hayes, Master Mariner of Port Adelaide, was an insolvent debtor. His liabilities were £5,951, 18 shillings and 5 pence, and his assets were £2,297, 14 shillings and 2 pence. It does have a note saying that the latter amount may have existed only in Hayes' imagination. In reference to his bankruptcy, he took the trouble to prove his debt. For money lent, £141 and 7 pence, and clothing for Captain and Mrs. Hayes. No dividend was paid and no assets were realised. So on the 16th of March 1858, Hayes, an undischarged bankrupt, absconded from Port Adelaide on the Waitemata, bound for Portland, Victoria. He skillfully evaded pursuit and withdrew suspicion from the schooner by an arrangement with Golati, who arrived at the signal station with a coloured man in a small sailing boat and said that he put Hayes on board the brig Fayaway, which had just sailed for Newcastle. Upon this becoming known to the Port Adelaide creditors, they chartered a steam tug, Young Australian, and gave chase to the Fayaway, which was now hull down, passing in the river the schooner Waitemata, in which Hayes was safely hidden. At about dusk, the tug was near the brig, but as darkness fell, a gale sprang up and the seasick creditors had to return, again passing the schooner with Hayes secretly aboard. The schooner proceeded on her voyage and was put into Kangaroo Island, spent a quiet week in Hog Bay, where Hayes made himself very agreeable to the Reeves family, engaging himself to marry Miss Reeves. He duly reached Melbourne via Portland and is lost to sight and knowledge for a time. Soon after Hayes had fled Captain Golati and the crew of the Estrella del Norte, he sued the ship for their wages, and on the 27th of May 1858 the ship was sold by order of the Vice Admiralty Court for £650, although Hayes alleged a loan of £3,000 and was said to have been expended on her a few months previously. Hayes could not resist spending a short time before he sailed in selling shares in a boat in which he had no interest whatsoever to gullible miners in Melbourne. On the 21st of July 1858, Mrs. Hayes arrived in Melbourne by the Admella from Adelaide, and on the 2nd of September 1858, Hayes sailed from Melbourne in command of the British ship Orestes, bound for Vancouver Island. How Hayes, who was an American, had no certificate of competency, managed to clear the Orestes at the customs, it will never be known. Apparently they were not particular at Melbourne in 1858, and the British Shipping Act of 1854 allowed men who'd been shipmasters prior to 1854 to obtain certificates of servitude. Hayes arrived in Honolulu in 1858. He was over 6 foot in height, big, bearded and blonde with a soft voice, a persuasive smile, an intriguing manner, and was a sly schemer. He had a powerful physique with piercing blue eyes and a pleasant baritone voice. The owner of the Arostas, Daniel A. Osborne, in January 1859 had heard what a sort of man Hayes was, and thinking it likely that Hayes would steal the Arostas, he issued a circular to the British consuls informing them that he had reason to believe that Hayes was not a trustworthy man, and he asked them to protect him if the arrestees came into their jurisdiction. The stolid Britishers did not take well to the dashing captain, who shortly had aroused the enmity of most of its passengers. In fact, so strained became the relations aboard the ship that she'd no sooner dropped anchor in Honolulu that a series of misfortunes wiped away all that he gained. His wife secured a separation from him on the grounds of cruelty. Mr. Clements, the supercargo of Arostes, that is, the person employed on board a vessel by the owner of cargo carried on the ship, exercised his prerogative and removed him from command, and a number of suits were filed against him by the passengers. One of them claimed that he'd entrusted £400 to the captain to be invested in liquor to be sold to the steerages at a profit, and that was the last he'd ever seen of his money or liquor. And thus, within a fortnight of his Australian windfall, he found himself again in a strange port without his wife, friends or money. In a short time he succeeded in running bills and circulating bad drafts to the amount of $2,000. One of his victims was a prominent businessman from whom he secured a loan of $50, pleading a sick wife. He decided to also go to San Francisco, but he was wanted there for piracy. He embarked secretly, leaving Honolulu, and in a strange coincidence or a tribute to his charm, his wife took passage on the same boat to seek friends in San Francisco, and before the voyage was much more than over, so ardent had been his attentions that he'd won her back. One of his first experiences in San Francisco was to walk face to face into the owner of the Entrato. The meeting must have been a severe surprise to both, although here the poise of the rascal is displayed in that he did not lose his wit, but concealed his surprise, laughed winningly, and restrained the irate gentleman from calling the police, piloting him to a table at a nearby cafe. With the soundest of logic, he explained as he filled the glasses from a bottle of a rare old wine that to call the police would be to rob him of any chance that he might have to recover his loss. In fact, the genial rogue warmed to his task as he saw a flicker of weakness cross the face of the other, and Hayes returned to San Francisco for no other purpose than to make what restitution he could for the owner's loss. He had a draft due from the Arostas owners, which would arrive shortly from Honolulu. This he intended to hand over to him unless, he smiled and shrugged his shoulders, the gentleman wished to put him in jail, in which case he'd get nothing. The argument sounded plausible, and they shook hands over another bottle of wine as the owner parted with the only chance he would ever have to recoup his losses, or at least punish his defrauder. He never again laid eyes upon Captain Hayes or upon his draft. His ready wit and his nerve allowed him to negotiate successfully with that ordeal, but imagine the amount required to emerge successful the following day when, in company with his Adelaide wife, Hayes was stopped by the San Francisco wife who'd been left with the liquor business. A quick intuitive appraisal convinced him that the Adelaide wife loved him more and was more desirable. He therefore excused himself and left her stranded on the sidewalk as he drew the San Francisco wife aside, frankly explaining the situation to her and begged her to help him out of his difficulty for old time's sake. As a token of gratitude, he would turn over his mythical Arostas money, $3,000, as soon as it should arrive. The charm and appeal of the rascal is evident when his wife agreed to relinquish her claim to him in consideration of money promised, and he emerged triumphant from this second most trying experience. The Adelaide wife clung to him even after his proof of infidelity. Hayes soon realised San Francisco was no place for him. He raised $500 in cash, probably borrowed from his wife, and made a first payment upon the ancient and leaky brig Alanita. He then had her overhauled with the help of Titchener and Company. Her cabin was fitted out in great luxury, with carpets, furniture, and everything new and the best. This habit of a luxurious cabin clung to Hayes throughout his long career. He laid in his provisions, including liquors, wines, and delicacies of every sort, all of which he took care to purchase on credit from various widely separated and obscure dealers who were not accustomed to supplying ships and were highly flattered at the business by the charming captain. He then advertised quick dispatch to Australia, collected the passage money and freight advances from his victims to the amount of several $1,000s. So the brig Alanita was completely overhauled, painted, ready, furnished and provisioned throughout without any outlay of actual cash on part of the captain. An event now transpired, though, to cause him to hurriedly change his plans. The man who filled the Alanita's water casks smelt a rat, and he put in for his wages. US Marshal Solomon took charge of the brig, and Hayes quickly saw that if other creditors hear of his game, it would be up. Not to be outwitted, he got such of his passengers as were in the vicinity of the boat, together with most of his crew, and that night, Sunday, 28th of August, 1859, during a temporary absence of the Marshal, the Alanita drew silently out of the harbour and with a fair breeze squared its way through the gate and into the open sea, clearing customs without so much as a backward glance. Sunday became a favourite sailing day for Captain after this, as it helped him to evade his creditors. When Marshal Solomon returned and found the boat gone, his rage was boundless. He spread the alarm and started a pursuit with the team tug Martin White. But as the press account remarked, it was like starting a snail to catch a swallow. The grey dawn found a motley assembly of tradesmen and passengers lining the dock and peering into the west but seeing nothing. Hayes even carried off with a wife and 3 children of one of the passengers, but leaving the husband and father ashore. So widespread had his dealings been in San Francisco that it was weeks before a complete list of all of his dupes could be compiled. As for the captain, he was having troubles of his own aboard the painted but old rotten craft. There were tears and remonstrances of members of broken families, a dissatisfied crew who also knew the real condition of the vessel and resented the dirty forecastle where they lived in marked contrast to the luxury of the cabin. The San Francisco Herald on the 5th of September 1859 had an article titled "A Bold Operator." Some time ago, a Captain Hayes purchased the brig Alanita from M.S. Morrison of this city for $800. He paid nearly $500 of the purchase money, and as he was about to be libelled, he staved it off for 2 weeks. And at 2:30 on Monday morning, the Alanita got underway and sailed from this port, leaving all debts unpaid, without taking a clearance or being in possession of a single paper. We learn that the following parties have been swindled by Captain Hayes. Mr. Morrison, $300, Mr. Hitchener, $250, ship's carpenters, $800, victuallers and grocers, $1,200, vegetable dealers, $300, a gentleman per borrowed money, $300, legal advice, $100, a bill which his lawyer promised to pay, $14, money borrowed from his lawyers, $30, plumbers, $500, and a multitude of other liabilities of less note, making a total of $4,000. Hayes also managed to swindle Mr. Morrison out of 40 tons of beans. It is supposed by those who appear to be best informed that he'll steer for Tahiti, where he will lay a cargo of oranges for the Sydney market. In part 2, you will find out where he sails next.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.